Okay, I'm going to read you a short story called The Lumber Room, and the author is H. Munro, but he was known when he wrote as Saki, and he wrote this story in 1914. And just so you know, well, it takes place in England, and a lumber room is, if you were a wealthy person in England back in the day, you had lots and lots of furniture, but you couldn't have all of it out all the time. You were changing it out for whatever reason. And so they had a room in the house where they would store all of the furniture that wasn't being used at the time, and it was called the lumber room. So basically, think of it as a storage area for things from around the house. Okay? So I'm going to read the story, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the cool things that go on in this story. Okay? Here we go. The children were to be driven as a special treat to the sands at Jagborough. That means a beach, sands at Jagborough. I'm going to stop as we go, just like I would if we were reading in class. Nicholas was not to be of the party. He was in disgrace. Only that morning he had refused to eat his wholesome bread and milk on the seemingly frivolous ground that there was a frog in it. Older and wiser and better people had told him that there could not possibly be a frog in his bread and milk, and that he was not to talk nonsense. He continued, nevertheless, to talk what seemed the veriest nonsense, and described with much detail the coloration and markings of the alleged frog. The dramatic part of the incident was that there really was a frog in Nicholas's basin of bread and milk. He had put it there himself, so he felt entitled to know something about it. The sin of taking a frog from the garden and putting it into a bowl of wholesome bread and milk was enlarged on at great length. That means that the adult in the room was telling him what a terrible thing that would be to do. But the fact that stood out clearest in the whole affair, as it presented itself to the mind of Nicholas, was that the older, wiser, and better people had been proved to be profoundly in error in matters about which they had expressed the utmost assurance. So just in this opening paragraph, you can see that we have a child, this boy Nicholas, and then there are also adults involved somehow. And we have what's unfolding is the difference between how the adults are and how children are. And so far, we've heard the adults referred to as older, wiser, and better people. But you kind of get the feeling that that is maybe sarcasm on the part of Saki, the author of this story. And we find ourselves right away siding with Nicholas, even though he has done a bad thing by putting a frog in his breakfast. Okay, so he goes on and he says, "You said there couldn't possibly be a frog in my bread and milk." "There was a frog in my bread and milk," he repeated with the insistence of a skilled tactician who does not intend to shift from favorable ground. So he's making an argument here for himself that you said it couldn't possibly happen, and yet it did happen. So there's also a thing going on in this story about telling the truth and what is reality and truth and who tells the truth. Because you'll see that the adults, who are supposed to be the better people, don't always tell the truth. So his boy cousin and girl cousin and his quite uninteresting younger brother were to be taken to Jagborough Sands that afternoon, and he was to stay at home. His cousin's aunt, who insisted by an unwarranted stretch of imagination in styling herself his aunt also, even though she really wasn't, had hastily invented the Jagborough expedition in order to impress on Nicholas the delights that he had justly forfeited by his disgraceful conduct at the breakfast table. So there was no planned trip to go to the beach today, but the aunt of the cousins, not really Nicholas's aunt, the aunt came up with it on the fly to punish him. "Well, because you've been so bad, Nicholas, all the other kids are going to get to go to the beach today, but you have to stay home." It was her habit, whenever one of the children fell from grace, to improvise, come up with on the fly, improvise something of a festival nature from which the offender would be rigorously debarred. So she had done this before. She comes up with something to punish you, comes up with it on the spur of the moment. If all the children sinned collectively, they were suddenly informed of a circus in a neighboring town. A circus of unrivaled merit and uncounted elephants, to which, but for their depravity, they would have been taken that very day. So we've seen a couple of instances here where the adult makes things up. So we know that the aunt in the past, if all the kids had been bad, she'll come up with something like, there's this amazing circus that we were going to take you to, and now you can't go. A few decent tears were looked for on the part of Nicholas when the moment for the departure of the expedition arrived. So they looked at him to see if he was really upset, because that was their goal. As a matter of fact, however, all the crying was done by his girl cousin, who scraped her knee rather painfully against the step of the carriage as she was scrambling in. How she did howl, said Nicholas cheerfully, as the party drove off without any of the elation of high spirits that should have characterized it. So off the other kids go, and they should be really excited and whooping and cheering, but no, there's none of that happening. She'll soon get over that, said the soi-disant aunt. Soi-disant means self-styled, like she calls herself his aunt, but she's not really his aunt. She'll soon get over that, said the soi-disant aunt. It will be a glorious afternoon for racing about over those beautiful sands. How they will enjoy themselves. Bobby won't enjoy himself much, and he won't race much either, said Nicholas with a grim chuckle. His boots are hurting him. They're too tight. Why didn't he tell me they were hurting? Said the aunt with some asperity. He told you twice, but you weren't listening. You often don't listen when we tell you important things. You are not to go into the gooseberry garden, said the aunt, changing the subject. Why not? Demanded Nicholas. Because you are in, said the aunt loftily.